Okay, so let's open in prayer. Be still and know I am the Lord. Let not your hearts trouble you. Lean not on your own understanding. In all your ways acknowledge him, and he will make your path straight. Lord, now is the hour for us to turn completely to you, surrender to your sovereignty, asking for your protection over Israel, over the soldiers, the commanders, the government, so that the nation of Israel may endure, steadfast in faith and unity everlasting, declaring, Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad. Hear, O Israel, the Lord your God, the Lord is one. Israel is now in unity as one nation, one family. Am Israel Kai. So we'll hand over to Sondra, and I'm sure all of us would love to hear how you're going, Sondra.
All right, so thank you all for joining us this morning, or this evening for you. And I just want to open, before we get to a little bit of what's going on in Israel, I want to open up with just a short thought from the Bible. You know, we read the weekly Torah portion, and right now we're in the middle of the Joseph stories at the end of Genesis, which I'm sure you will agree are some of the most dramatic stories in the Bible, and how, you know, Joseph, in fact, just this week, we're going to see Joseph revealing himself to his brothers. That's always so interesting and exciting. But anyway, I just want to jump ahead to the very end of Genesis, and we have here Jacob giving instruction to his 12 sons about how and where to bury him. And he says very clearly, he says he's commanding to him, he says, I will soon be passing away, I'll be gathered to my fathers, as that was the way it was said in the Bible. He says, bury me with my fathers in the cave in the field of Ephron the Hittite, in the cave in the field of Machpelah, on the face of Mamre, in the land of Canaan, which Abraham purchased the field from Ephron the Hittite as a burial tomb. And, you know, and it goes, and of course that's what they do. And at the very end, when they actually bury him, it repeats this again. His sons did so. They carried his sons to the land of Canaan. They buried him in the cave of the field of Machpelah, which Abraham purchased the field as a burial estate from Ephron the Hittite at Mamre. And you have to ask yourself, why do we have to have all this repetition? And I think this message is particularly powerful for us today, as Israel is literally battling for its very existence. And as we are battling a fight, you know, in any other country, it would be obvious if you are attacked from across your border, you're going to attack back, and you're going to do whatever you can to destroy your enemy and to ensure that your people are not vulnerable in the same way ever again. That's just common sense. And yet what we're seeing now all over the world is people calling into question Israel's very right to exist. And we have that phrase that the pro-Palestinian protesters are constantly saying, from the river to the sea, Palestine will be free. Anybody who says that means no Israel. From the river, meaning the Jordan River, to the sea, the Mediterranean Sea, what is in there in the middle? That is the state of Israel, in the biblical land of Israel. It's the same place that Jacob here refers to, and the Bible refers to as the land of Canaan. That is what is from the river to the sea. And here we have Joseph, whose great-grandfather, bought the land. And he is leading, he's getting the command, him with his brothers, getting the command from their father to bury him in the place of his fathers. And of course, this is the very place that Abraham purchased. And I think what we see here is that our claim to the land of Israel is not just about, this is the land that God promised to Abraham. Yes, that's very, very important. But what it did require is that in every single generation, we needed to take possession and we needed to declare, this is ours. It belonged to our parents. It belonged to our grandparents. It belonged to our great grandparents. And we still say that today. And we don't just say it about the Machpelah cave in Hebron that Abraham bought. We say it about the whole land of Israel. God gave it to us and our people conquered it. And we lived here, and we established governments here and kingdoms here. And we have now come back, just as God has promised. And so what we are doing now is not just filling God's promise, but we are remaining loyal to our heritage and to the promises that God had made originally to our forefathers. And this is something that is very important for the Jewish people today to remember, and frankly, very important for all people who love Israel, and especially those people who love Israel, who read and appreciate the Bible, because this is the message that resonates to all of us from the Bible. If you take the time to read it, which of course is the bigger challenge, getting everybody to read it, even Christians, and we'll talk a little bit about that later. But anyway, that's just a message that I wanted to start out with. So what's going on in Israel? We turned on the news. As you well know, I'm an Orthodox Jew, as are many of the people in Judea and Samaria, Shmuel as well. And so when we present our perspective, it's very often the perspective of Orthodox Jews. And what that means is that on the Sabbath, we don't have our TV on, the computer on, the radio on, and we don't know what's going on. And unfortunately, right after Shabbat, we opened up the news and we learned of a tragic, tragic killing of three hostages. I don't know if you heard this story, but it's just, every time I think of it, it literally makes me sick. These three people who had survived somehow in Hamas captivity for more than 70 days. And then, somehow, and it's not clear, did they run away from their captors? Did the captors abandon them because they realized the Israelis were coming close? They managed to come out. They identified themselves as Israelis. They took off their shirts so it would be clear that they have no weapons on them, that they have no explosives wrapped around them. And yet, for some reason that we really do not understand, the Israeli soldiers mistook them for Hamas terrorists and shot them. And and we know mistakes like this can happen, and it was a mistake. It was nothing evil about it. It was just so sad, so incredibly sad that this happened. And so that's, what can I tell you? Something that has made us so disturbed. But this too is something that is part of war, and these people should have never been captured. They should have been released right away. And but it is, of course, made the atmosphere in Israel that much more urgent. How can we get these hostages back? And we know that in the IDF, they're going to be taking a lot more care to make sure that soldiers, it's a problem. I understand where the soldiers are coming from. The Hamas are constantly coming out pretending to be Israelis. And it's very difficult to figure out who's who in the heat of the battle. But things were not done correctly, there's no question, and hopefully this will never happen again. We all just are that much more vigilant in our prayers to bring the hostages back soon and safely. There are far fewer rocket attacks coming from Gaza, thank God, but we have an uptick in rocket attacks in other places. We have constant rocket attacks going on in the north. I recently met a family in Eilat who have been here for 2 months because, like the whole northern border of Israel, there's about 60,000 people from the north of Israel who have been evacuated. They're in Haifa, they're in Eilat, they're in Jerusalem, they're in hotels all over. We still have 129 hostages that we presume to be alive in the hands of the Hamas. There is also ongoing activity north of Lebanon. In other words, there's activity in Syria as well. There was a recent possible attack of a rocket fire close to the Jordan Valley. There was a terrorist attack yesterday in Benjamin, near the communities of Ateret and Neve Tzuf. Some of you may have visited Neve Tzuf with me. In that area, beautiful area, terrorists shot at a car. A young woman was injured, thankfully, not seriously. A baby was in the car, a miracle that, we didn't see worse injury as part of that attack. What we are seeing is, and of course, one of the things that is now affecting and waking up the world to a certain degree is the attacks against international shipping, everything going in through the Persian Gulf and up to the Red Sea, whether towards the Suez Canal or coming to Eilat to dock here. The Houthim, which are the Iranian-backed terrorist group in Yemen, are shooting missiles at ships from all nationalities. And we are hearing that there's an international coalition that is being put together to do something about it. But unfortunately, from what we're hearing, what they seem to be doing about it is just patrol work. Okay, well, that's not enough, because they'll patrol for a few weeks and then they'll go away. There needs to be also serious work, military, I believe, against the Houthim in Iran. So if you think of Israel at this point as this long, narrow strip, surrounded on all sides by active enemies. We always used to say we're surrounded by enemies, but now we're talking active enemies, okay? We have Syria and Lebanon in the north, where the Hezbollah are the most active. In the east, we have Jordan. In Jordan, okay, Jordan is a country at peace with Israel, but in Jordan, we know there are terrorist groups who are looking for every opportunity. They're also smuggling arms into Judea and Samaria. Just to the east of Jordan, we have Iraq, which is today very much influenced by Iran. There are certain sections that are controlled by the Shiites, and they, together with Iran, and then their supporters in Yemen, are attacking us from that part of the world. We have, of course, what's going on in Gaza. It's a bad time, and Israel is really struggling to figure out how to handle this all. It would be very good for us if we could focus on Gaza before we went to the other areas. One of the problems we know for a fact, we're going to have to attack in the north, there's no question, because even if just so that 60,000 people can go back home. Imagine what that is. 60,000 people in hotels, how difficult and how disruptive that is for family life. And at the same time, jobs, stores, factories, all sorts of things that normally operate in their areas are just shut down. And what that's doing to the economy, what that's doing to these individuals' lives, very, very difficult. So this is such a summary of what we're dealing with right now. But what it does bring us to, and of course, one of the questions that is beginning to come up today is what's going to happen in Gaza, where they say it on the day after. Okay, let's assume we reach we achieve our goals. We have a complete and total defeat of Hamas. We get rid of the terrorist infrastructure. We get rid of all the missiles. We get rid of all the terrorists and, all of them. And let's assume that happens, which is a big if, but let's assume and let's hope and for now, everybody in Israel from right and left are declaring that is what needs to happen. There's tremendous unity and consensus on that issue. We are a bit disturbed because there's already tremendous international pressure, first and foremost from the United States, to get the job done quick. Now, can you imagine what would have happened to the defeat of ISIS and what was going on in Iraq and Afghanistan with the United States and their allies in there? Can you imagine if someone had said to them, get the job done in 3 months? I mean, they were there for years. Okay, so you can't say get the job done and finish it in 3 months. It just doesn't work. So let's hope that our leaders are able to stick to the guns and keep going until the job is really done. Then the question is, what is next? And today, of course, the United States is pressuring Israel tremendously to put forward a plan. Israel is trying to delay putting forward a plan for two reasons. Number one, it's very difficult to put forth a plan when you don't see exactly how successful you've been. And what does it mean to defeat the Hamas when we know for a fact that the vast majority of the citizens of Gaza support Hamas? People try to portray them as innocent civilians who were taken hostage by Hamas. Now, we will agree that Hamas was not good for them. And yet, amazingly so, they supported them. These civilians voted in Hamas, and recent surveys show that both in Gaza and in Judea and Samaria, if elections were held today, Hamas would win by a landslide. So it's not enough to get rid of the missile launchers. It's not enough to get rid of the terrorist leaders. Something has to be done to change who these people are. Is that even possible? And for example, today, much of the northern part of the Gaza Strip is really in rubble, and the international community is eager to rebuild that. I am not eager to rebuild that. There was a woman that was on television a few times. Oh, she may have only been on once, but they replayed her statement. It was a great statement. She lived in one of those communities just outside of Gaza that was attacked on that day. And she said, and she's in a hotel, she's been evacuated. Her home is destroyed. And she says, so they ask her, as they ask everybody, will you go back? And she says, I would love to go back, and I want for my house to be able to see an uninterrupted view to the sea. An uninterrupted view to the sea. And, how does this happen? Who knows? But at the same time, you have the United States pressuring Israel to rebuild the north and to allow all these people back so you can defeat the Hamas. Then if all these people come back, you can have the same thing in another year or two. And we'll see another October 7th, not 2023, but 2025. And this is not something that we are willing to tolerate. So one of the things is, what does your plan look like after? Will depend a lot on what happens and how much we've succeeded and where these leaders have gone, and are they dead or are they somewhere else? And are we rebuilding or not rebuilding, and all of that. But the second thing is, we know that when we put forward our plan for after, it's going to be in direct clash to the United States, which is, as of today, our closest ally. Because they are talking about bringing back the Palestinian Authority. And as Netanyahu says, why would we bring back the Palestinian Authority, who has proven itself to be an ongoing supporter of terrorism? They don't like Hamas because they're political rivals, but they don't, and they're not the religious fanatics that the Hamas is. There's no question. They don't have that same religious fanaticism in their daily lives. But in terms of their goal to destroy Israel, and the Palestinian Authority till this minute has not condemned the events of October 7th, not once. So who wants them back? So these are the kinds of things that are going on now. In Israel, there are people there's quite a large majority of people who feel that Israel must retain security control of the Gaza Strip for many years to come at a minimum. Because even if you defeat Hamas, if you leave, there's nothing to prevent them from coming back and starting again. And there's also a greater understanding that there was knowledge on behalf of both Israel and the international community of enormous finances that were moving around, billions of dollars in the hands of Hamas that were being used. First of all, they were investing money in the stock exchange and investments, growing this pot of money, and then using this money to fund these tunnels and to fund their weapons and their training and all this stuff. So it wasn't just money from Iran. It was the money they had gotten, that they themselves were growing that money and investing it. So, and there was no stopping it. Nobody really, and I laugh sometimes when I think about it, because we as a nonprofit organization in Israel are subject to very, very strict banking rules. And that means that every single time we get donations coming in from abroad of a sizable amount, we have to get an authorization that the source of the funds, Okay, we have to fill out an affidavit that says the source of these funds are charitable donations and they're from good people. The purpose of all those authorizations is to make sure that we're not being used as a money laundering vehicle for arms smuggling, for terrorism, for all that stuff. So they're very strict about all these little organizations like me and making sure we're doing everything right. And at the same time, Hamas is having no trouble moving billions of dollars and funding terror right, left, and center, and Iran and everybody else. So something has to be changed on the international screen to make sure that that doesn't happen again. Bottom line, though, physical presence. If we had not left Gaza in 2005, what we are seeing today would never have happened. Never. Because we would have been there, we would have been fighting Hamas, we would have been preventing Hamas from growing. Yes, there was constant terrorist activity, and our soldiers were losing their lives fighting in Gaza, which is one of the reasons there was so much support for withdrawal from Gaza, because soldiers were losing their lives. And I understand that. And when you're watching the television and you're seeing every few weeks or every few months, another couple soldiers are dying, you say, oh my gosh, maybe we can get our soldiers out of there. And that was more than anything else, I would say the motivation for the support for the disengagement, for the expulsion of the Jews from Gaza. Today, though, we're a much more cynical group of people because we realize then we were seeing a few soldiers every few months. Today, we're seeing in our battle to get Gaza back every single day, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9 soldiers falling in this battle every single day. And nobody doubts, with all of our heavy hearts, nobody doubts that it is necessary, that there is no other way to get back Gaza and defeat our enemies so that we protect our civilians just on the other side of Gaza. And had we been there to begin with, even though we were paying a price then, does not compare to the price we're paying today in soldiers' lives, not to mention the more than 1,200 civilians that were massacred on that one day on October 7th. So this is something that is definitely becoming clear to people in the country with regard to Gaza. And I think it is really hitting home about Judea and Samaria as well. Now, I know all of you understand as well as I do how critical Judea and Samaria is to Israel from a biblical and a spiritual perspective. But today, I just want to focus on the strategic perspective, on the safety and security of all of Israel. We have chosen to live in Judea and Samaria, and yes, it is more dangerous where we live than it is in Tel Aviv. No question, okay? It is not more dangerous today than it is on the northern border and than it is on the Gaza border. There, it is far more dangerous today, no question. But for quite a while, we were in the most dangerous place, and we still are. And even as the IDF is fighting very intensively, particularly in Gaza, and to a certain extent in the north, they are fighting intensively in Judea and Samaria as well. In Azum, which is a village right next door to my community of Karnei Shomron, the IDF is in there every single night, finding terrorists, capturing them, pulling them out. Our road is suddenly so much safer than it has been for months because of this constant activity. Activity in Jenin, including airstrikes in Jenin, which we didn't see before. But what did they find in Jenin? They found a tunnel. They found a tunnel in Jenin that the Palestinians had dug. The Palestinians in Judea and Samaria don't have anywhere the abilities or the equipment or the terrorist infrastructure that they had in Gaza. And there's only one reason why they don't, because we are there. We are there, and because we're there, the IDF is there. It is very difficult to justify a military presence if you don't have civilians there. And this is something we all have to remember. So our living in Judea and Samaria is not just important for spiritual reasons, which for me is probably my most important motivating force, because I'm not a military person by definition. Okay. I come to Judea and Samaria, I breathe in the air, I see the mountains, and I'm saying, I know this is where, my forefathers walked. I know this is where Abraham walked. I know this is where, Elijah walked. I know this is where Elisha walked for sure. This is what does it for me. Okay. But we have to remember on a practical level how vital this area is for the entire country. We have to be vigilant on all our borders, and the only way to do that is to be there physically everywhere. And if we have any hope or prayer of making Israel a safer place to be, it is because we have roundly defeated our enemies, and we are in total physical control of all the area, that same area that the Bible calls the land of Canaan and that we call today the state of Israel. So I talked a lot about all this stuff, and I'm only now getting to what I wanted to be my main subject of conversation and what I would really like to open up for questions and answers. And that is the effects of all of this campaign on what we're seeing around the world, particularly the increase in anti-Semitism. And just to mention a few things that are hitting the news here that we know is going on in different parts of the world. The biggest news in the last week or so was about what's been going on the campuses of universities in the United States. In one university in Cornell, I believe, Jews were barricaded into the library and were not able to leave because there were violent mobs outside threatening to harm them. We have Jews being attacked on campuses. We have pro-Palestinian rallies calling for intifada, genocide of Jews, etc., and the university leadership doing almost nothing to stop it. The climax of this was the U.S. Congress held hearings on the issue of anti-Semitism on U.S. campuses, keeping in mind that even though these are largely private universities, they still receive a great deal of federal funding. And therefore, Congress was holding a hearing to see what is happening to universities that they are funding. They called the presidents of 3 universities, very, very elite universities, Harvard, MIT, and Penn, and questioned them. And there was one particular congresswoman, a wonderful woman, and she really hammered the issue. She asked each one of them, if students on your campus would call for the genocide of the Jewish people, would you consider that to be in violation of your university's code of conduct? And she could not get a yes out of any one of those 3 university presidents. And their answers were all, depends on the context. Now, of course, this caused a tremendous uproar. One of the presidents has since resigned. Others are being threatened with resignation. Major Jewish donors have pulled their funding from these universities. As I said, they're private universities, so most of the funding is not from the U.S. government, but from private donors. Unfortunately, what has come to light recently is that one of the largest donors to private universities in the United States today is Qatar. So a lot of these universities, if you talk about financially, they're willing to lose those few private Jewish donors because they're getting a lot more money from Qatar. So this is also something that needs to be considered. But I want to look at this answer. Depends on the context. And what this does, it basically brings us back to what I believe has become the breeding ground for the growth of anti-Semitism in countries that we would have all assumed would be vital and healthy democracies, places that would not condone racism, would not condone hatred of anybody. And here we're seeing flourishing anti-Semitism. Over the last 10 or 20 years, we're seeing the flourishing of a very destructive ideology that is often called woke. Okay? What is woke? I mean, woke is a relatively new term. I remember about 10 or 15 years ago, we were talking about moral equivalence or moral relativism, okay? And let's start with that, okay? What did that mean? And that's exactly the answer that the university presidents gave. Would you consider genocide a problem? And their answer was, it depends. Okay. Moral relativism is exactly that. It is saying there is no longer a right or wrong. It all depends. So, for example, if a person who has been a downtrodden minority goes and murders somebody in cold blood, is that wrong? The answer is it depends, because we have to consider, has this person been oppressed? Has he been the victim of racism? Do we have to understand him? And then we have a trouble saying cold-blooded murder is wrong. Now, I would like to just clarify, I believe very strongly in the importance of really understanding every individual person we meet. Okay, even if something has done something wrong, it is worthwhile for us, and I'm sure you'll agree with me, because both Christianity and Judaism share the doctrines of the ability to repent. Okay, so if you're going to be able to repent, you need to be able to understand, where did your sin come from? And we, as outsiders talking to somebody else, we're all encouraged in our faith to understand the person and give him space to repent, but not give him space to excuse what he did as something that's okay. It's a huge, huge difference. And so what began as a certain liberal humanistic ideology that said, understand each person for who he is, turned into an ideology that said there's no such thing as good or evil. It all depends on the context. And I think what we are seeing today is this anti-Semitism is an outgrowth of all of this. Now, also in a more specific way, we have the same kind of ideology talks a great deal about racism. We are all against racism, but what once became everybody's against racism, and if you're a racist, you need to work on yourself so that you're not a racist. So you accept everybody, doesn't matter their color or their size or their religion or their race or whatever. We all, I'm sure, agree on that. But what's happened now is that there is this other ideology which goes together, called intersectionality, which means if you're a minority, if you're a racial minority, you stick together and you all are allies, even though you really have nothing in common. And the people who are your enemies are the white people. So how does this affect the Jews? All right. So I'll give you a little anecdote. My daughter and son-in-law spent 4 years in the United States until 2 years ago, until a year and a half ago, because my son-in-law was doing a postdoctoral fellowship at Yale University, a very, very nice university, which today has a lot of anti-Semitism. When he was there, he said he felt seeds of it, but nothing really serious. But anyway, this has nothing to do with anti-Semitism. They were in Connecticut, and they had to go register for something or other official. I don't remember what it was, maybe to pay your city taxes or whatever. And they had to fill out a form. And so they asked them, what's your race? Okay. And my daughter and my son-in-law looked at each other because no one had ever asked them that question. Now, my son-in-law, his family is Middle Eastern. His mother is from Iran. His father is, his father is 7 generations from Jerusalem. You know, his family goes back many generations in Israel, but originally from a combination of Iraq and North Africa. Okay, dark, very dark skinned. My daughter is very fair skinned and fairly blonde. Okay, so they're both Jewish, they are both Israeli, and that is the only identification they have ever felt comfortable with. And suddenly they were asked, what is your race? And what my daughter's supposed to write Caucasian and my son-in-law is supposed to write something else, as if it just was so foreign to them, because to them, they were Jewish. And if you look at Jews, especially in Israel, you will see Jews of every single color, from pale white to real dark black and everything in between. It's what happens when you're spread all over the world for 2,000 years. And yet now, all of a sudden, Jews in America are white. And therefore, whereas until the 50s and 60s, there were until the late 60s, there were quotas against admitting Jews to universities. Okay, so we were a persecuted minority in many, certainly in Europe, we were a severely persecuted minority. And even in the United States, we were a persecuted minority. As soon as they removed the quotas against Jews, they put in affirmative action and they said, if you're Black, you'll be able to get into the university with easier standards than if you're white, which meant Jews got screwed twice. First, we were a persecuted minority and we weren't able to come in normal numbers. And then once we were no longer a persecuted minority, we became part of the white oppressors, and we're seeing that even worse today. I am against racism with every fabric of my body. But to say that if you're anti-racism means you have to be pro-Palestinian and you have to be an anti-Semite, there is something wrong with this world if that is what's become the norm, and unfortunately it is. In addition to issues that we're seeing in the United States, unfortunately, we were just informed recently, Israel has put out warnings to people traveling abroad that there are certain countries that they need to be more careful about. More careful in the sense of showing Jewish or Israeli identification in public, wearing a Star of David, for men wearing a kippah, having a symbol of an Israeli flag on your bag, whatever. Anything that would make it clear you are Jewish or you are Israeli. They're telling people to tone it down in certain countries. England, France, Germany, and just recently, Australia. And this, of course, has hit us in a very, very shocking way. There was an incident, I understand, we heard about it here in Israel, in Melbourne. There was a delegation of representatives of the families of the hostages who came to Australia to talk to government leaders and leaders of the Jewish community to plead the cause of these hostages and they're going all over the world, talking to leaders all over the world and getting them to use whatever pressure they have and what influence they have, whether in the United Nations or, with Arab countries or whatever, to get these hostages released. So they were part of one of these kinds of delegations, and there was a whole mob of pro-Palestinian people that gathered in the hotel, and they were violent and was actually very, very threatening to them. And so this, I think, is what prompted this warning that came out from Israel about traveling to Australia. So this is just kind of like an overview of what's going on in Israel, what we're seeing going on around the world as a result. And I just want to end my part of this with a couple of points of action, and I'll definitely repeat these as well. But for now, I think based upon everything I've said today, you can well understand how vital it is that you, each and every one of you, raise your voices for Israel. Whether that means participating in a rally for Israel, whether that means engaging people who are against Israel, whether that means, and here I would say this is probably the most important place where you can get involved, is to actually talk to your own leaders in the church. Because when you're talking to leaders in the church as Christians, and you probably understand this much better than I do, there's no justification for a Christian to be anti-Israel. Because if they're anti-Israel, they're anti the Bible, they're anti-God, full stop. There is really no other way to understand it. And I know I've studied this, and I know many of you, and you know about replacement theology, and you know about all that kind of stuff. It is corrupt theology. It makes no sense. And so on that level alone, I think it is worth engaging with your own church and your own leaders and to give them, encourage them to do something. Second, I was talking about the importance of our physical presence and how that affects Gaza, but I also talked about the importance of our physical presence here in Judea and Samaria. The situation has always been, and today it's much worse, that all of our civilians, we have now 500,000 Jews living in Judea and Samaria, every one of us have a dual function. We are here because this is part of the spiritual return to the land of Israel that God had prophesied, but we're also here to protect the entire land of Israel, because our physical presence together with the physical presence of the IDF in these areas, are vital to the protection of Israel. But even as we are here now, when the soldiers come in, they come in with full gear, etc. We're just ordinary people living in communities, which is why it is more important today than ever before to ensure that we have protection for these communities, civilian protection for these communities, to do much more than what the army is able to do for the immediate types of threats. And this is something that has been our main focus in fundraising since October 7th. And so I want to encourage you. I know many of you are giving already, and that's wonderful. If there's anything you can give to help protect the people in Judea and Samaria, we would be very grateful. And lastly, my colleague Shmuel, the new director of CFOIC, is planning a trip to Australia. He'll be coming from the 26th of February through the 7th of March, a short trip, but an important trip. And while there's already been, and Pam can address this better than I can, while there's already been a number of events that have been scheduled, there is a great deal of hesitation on behalf of people to host an event for Israel today. And this goes back really to what we were saying before about people who are, hesitant, they're afraid, maybe even closet anti-Semites. And I, found this quote that I want to end with. I saved it in my phone and now I think it's gone. Where is it? Okay, I will find it. A wonderful quote that many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with the idea of it. But what this is, let me just read it to you. This is a quote that was said by John Stuart Mill in 1867. Okay, very important. Listen to this. Let not anyone pacify his conscience by the delusion that he can do no harm if he takes no part and forms no opinion. Bad men need nothing more to compass their ends than that good men should look on and do nothing. He is not a good man who without a protest allows wrong to be committed in his name and with the means which he helps to supply, because he will not trouble himself to use his mind on the subject. And I would say that to every single person who Pam or any of you have called or asked, will you host in a church? Will you host a meeting for Shmuel? Will you help organize something for Israel? Will you as a pastor speak out for Israel in your church? Any pastor who says no, any pastor who refuses to return your phone call or respond to your email, he is not a good man. He is allowing evil to happen. And John Stuart Mill, I don't know if he was a Christian, maybe he was. He was speaking as a human being, okay? And he was saying something that I think have to resonate with all of us. There is so much evil around us today. It is enough for us to do nothing to allow evil to win. And that is something for us that we have to understand is our clarion call. We cannot do nothing. So I'd like to open this up to questions, or Pam, if you have any comments that you'd like to contribute before we have questions.
Well, I would just like to say that Janine and Marion and Joy, their area is Melbourne, and they've been working really hard to spread requests about hosting Shmuel. And of course, Melbourne is the centerpiece of the Jewish community, and this rise in, very unpleasant incidents. So would the ladies like to say anything at this moment? No.
Oh, there's a lot to say. I think talking about the pastors, there has been a reluctance. I know the church that I go to, there was silence. So I sent a message. Anyway, that has turned around now, but I feel, Sondra, like we have to give them no rest. The pastors, the priests, the leaders, we have to that's how I feel. I just give them no rest, Lord. until they have a revelation. And they shouldn't even need a revelation until they know the truth about Israel. And I mean, it's in the Bible, and I think we just do what we can. I went to a Hanukkah in Geelong. It was a Chabad, it was organized by Chabad, and I thought, I'm just going to go and let the Jewish people know that we do have a prayer group. We send money to Israel. And they were really moved to hear that, you know, that we have this group in Geelong that's praying for them. And two of them have got in touch with me. I think we just have to, you know, go to the rallies. We have to do whatever we can and I'm sure everybody is doing what they can, but it's just like, give them no rest, just do whatever you can. The Australian Christian Lobby has started a petition against anti-Semitism. They've got, I think, around almost 4,000 signatures just in 4 days.
Wow.
At least it's a start. I feel that finally, you know, but the Jewish people have said to me that the silence from the church, they can't understand it, and I can't explain it. So I just wanted to say that.
Yes, it's very complicated because I've had a one-on-one conversation with a pastor, just generally following up on my letter to him. And first off, he was very rude about Israel and about Israel. And so then I just was very polite and said, well, thank you very much for your time. And then he started on me and started challenging my own Christianity and where do you stand? And so I was very gracious and quiet, and I just said, well, yes, I'm a Christian, I'm saved, and so then I just thanked him again and said, look, thank you for your time. And because this also could probably be how can we move forward as a group in unity to support this situation where Christians need to understand Israel is everything to us. And I think that they have this separation, all that kind of replacement theology. Really, it has to come out of them, because without Israel, we aren't anything. And we need to have a voice to speak and say. And on that point, we should be rising up where possible to say to our discipleship leaders, can you start to talk to us about Israel in the Bible? Can you start to tell us what's Israel's role? What's Jacob in Israel? And what are the end time promises? What's the circumstance for us as Christians in our relationship with Israel? I think that we could awaken our congregations and our discipleship leaders and different denominations by posing that question. Can you tell me at your theological education level, where's Israel? Where's Israel?
Excuse me, Pam and Sondra, just a comment to make on the basis of very recent conversations that I've had with two elders from our church, one of whom implicitly and slightly more explicitly was giving an indication of the very fine line that he walks, understanding the cultural and historical framework of the scriptures and how understanding God's eternal divine purposes for Israel is so important in our own growth and maturity as believers. The indication he was giving was he walks such a fine line with those in the congregation who are passionately advocating for Israel and those who don't. And a second conversation I had with an elder from our church that went along the line, I was saying to him something of what you just said, Pam. We'd love to know more about the Hebraic context of the scriptures for our own growth and learning and maturity. And he said, Lyndall, I have had people come to me from this congregation itself and say, don't speak about those things. We are not interested. So while I don't excuse our leaders for not supporting Israel and the Jewish people, my heart goes out to them as human beings who walk such a fine line with people literally coming at them from both sides. And it is seen as very much a two-sided issue.
But do you see that perhaps there is responsibility here for the leadership to be less concerned about their popularity and more concerned with educating, because that's their job?
Yes, very much so. And that we had actually both conversations that I'm thinking of were very full, frank, and robust. Let me be honest.
Okay.
And I was saying to them almost exactly that, Sondra, almost exactly that. So yes, absolutely, your point is taken. That has been mentioned by my good self and by Mama Mag on more than one occasion. It feels like, and we don't give up, but it feels like your head against a brick wall so constantly, not only for trying to talk to people, individual members of a congregation, to demonstrate to them something of the richness and the depth that comes from understanding the scriptures in these ways, but talking to the leaders who are so keen to keep an even keel and a fine line. We don't argue well, Sondra. We're Christians and we're Westerners. We don't argue well. It scares us. We've actually had a conversation about that before.
Although one of the things that I was suggesting, we have this little map booklet, okay, that we have a lot of them. And in terms of, it's not a scriptural reference, it is a practical reference for people who say the land belonged to Palestine or the land belonged to the Arabs. It is a very effective, tool for that. And this is there, I know, things being shipped to Pam as we speak, but we can always ship more. And that would be something that perhaps, even if you don't want to argue, put a booklet like that into the hands of somebody and say, take a look at this, take a look at the website that's on the back, read about it, and then come back to me with more. And I think also, Pam, you were talking about more education on the scriptural side of things.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, if we really, if we need help, discipleship leaders, mainly the discipleship leaders, should be educated at tertiary level. But if they're not and they're good organisers, then there's a heap of information around that we could tap into to understand. And the first point of call would be Sondra and Shmuel. They would be delighted in teaching from the Tanakh. And I could throw my 2 bobs worth in for the New Testament, and we could form together, essential scriptures and the relevance as it flows, because it really is just one book, that we could offer the discipleship leaders some material. And Sondra so kindly offered that Shmuel or herself would even have a Zoom meeting, So the options are there within CFOIC, but in a broader scope, the Christian church should have education material about Israel.
Sondra,
I'll go. I'll get to Barry. We'll just let Marion speak, Barry, and then I'll ask your question.
So just in hearing Lyndall, congratulations. I think I think you're amazing. Keep going. And, I think I want to be frank to my dearest friend, Sondra. The church is a mess.
Yes.
And the war in Israel has exposed much.
Yes.
And there's always in history, where was the voice of the church in Germany? Well, I want to tell you, there was a lot of people who spoke and they died.
Yes.
They didn't write a book like Dietrich Bonhoeffer, got one written, but there's never silence in the true saints of God in the way to walk uprightly. And you're looking at every square right now, and it's only the grace of heaven that we know who you are. Sadly, the others are still blinded. We have now got not just Christianity, we've got churchology. It's going further and further away from doctrinally sound life in scriptures. So I think we've already had this discussion. I just want to affirm to you that each one of us here tonight, I live in a very, Melbourne with a wonderful, very large community of Jewish people. And we're getting whispers. I've already had this discussion with you of things that are happening, and they don't want to tell anyone because they don't want it on the news. I've had a couple of chats with a very well-known Jew in Melbourne to assure him that we are here. And when the time comes, if we have to help, because he said to me, another Jewish man is saying the diaspora is over. Everyone needs to go home. So that's another thing. While you're fighting a war, things are moving in the nations to bring them back. This is a huge, different day. So it's a huge different day. It's a huge different day. You've got disruption all over the nation, and there's people who are supposedly going to think about returning to this mess that the war has caused. So I just want to affirm, and I'm sure everyone will say amen, we love you. We will do what we understand we need to do. It may come in different fashions and forms. We may not end up like a Deirdre Bonhoeffer, but that's where it's going to be. But it's a remnant, Sondra. It's not going to be the huge congregational people, and even the leaders of the Christian church now are left very wanting. A couple of very well-known international leaders have just had to step aside because their personal lives were not up to scratch. We're facing a lot of things. It's no excuse, but it's just that you can be sure you will always have friends in the nations who will do everything they can to see this war won. We are with you. We believe in who you are, but they won't be the great numbers, I don't believe. But keep going, Lyndall.
I just want to comment on what you said, Marion. I found that we have had conversations. I agree. First of all, Lyndall is a wonderful model, I think, for all of us. So just, there's no question when I'm speaking to you, I know that you are on our side, which is why I'm able to speak so openly. I'm saddened, Marion, by your comment that the church is such a mess. You see, I realize that we have problems with all these leaders, but I just, there's a part of me with this certain optimistic center that says, it cannot be all of them. And I understand that it'll be a remnant, but I want to urge you not to give up. Now, if you're talking,
no, that's not an option.
Right. No. So in other words, if you go to a pastor and he's obnoxious, and you see it's a waste of time, don't waste your time. The question is there any way to get to those people in his church who are neutral or they don't know anything? How can we get to them to rescue them from the negative influence that they're hearing in the church?
Yes, just a very quick comment in that space, Sondra, that's very perceptive. My experience very recently, and not so recently, has been that leaders in our congregations do feel that they're walking a very fine line, and perhaps they feel they can't be as public as they would like to be. But here's my experience in the last 2 months. Individuals, and you and I had this conversation last time you were in Brisbane, Sondra, that while it may not be possible to really make strong inroads as we would like into at a denominational level, it's individual people, individuals who will come up afterwards and ask questions and say, what would a Jewish perspective be on this scripture? How are the Jewish people feeling now? And I'm able to put them in contact with local Jewish organisations and say, here is where you might be able to get some information, can I graciously say, from the horse's mouth, directly from the people impacted by this. It's the individuals, the ones and the twos who are coming up and having those conversations. They're there. They are
So
there.
these are the
and they
people
want to know.
that this is our challenge then, as Shmuel is coming to Australia in 2 months' time. This is the opportunity, because even if you cannot find a church that will host him, if you can have a venue and you can collect to that venue, not 1 or 2 people, but if everybody involved can each bring 10 people and you end up with an event of 40 or 50 people comprised of individuals, the ones, the twos, the threes from these various churches, that is probably the most important kind of event that we can have, because we are isolating the individuals that are willing to listen, and they don't all have to be pro-Israel. They just have to be willing to listen.
Well, this is the impact of the October 7th attacks, from my perspective, is that individual Christians who never would have asked these questions, never would have made a public stand, are asking questions now. The heinousness of what occurred is prompting them to say, this is unacceptable, and if I have to take a public stand and cop ridicule for it, then I will. They're doing what might seem like small things, like changing their Facebook profiles with the Israeli flag on it, or a comment about supporting Israel. You know, they're doing their own little things, and this is happening in the last 2 months, where individual Christians wouldn't have done that previously. That's been my experience. So heinous as that was, this has been such a prompt for people who wouldn't have said anything in the public sphere previously to start doing so.
It is actually.
I'm sorry to interrupt because I've got to go, but can I just say I want to thoroughly recommend your booklet, Sondra. You sent me some quite a while ago, and they have been so good for people who don't understand these. And to an organisation called Prayer for Israel produces loads of booklets that quotes all the scriptures in the Tanakh showing where God's position on Israel and the need of the return to the land. And thirdly, the church is becoming so persecuted in both Australia and our countries, so much division, people leave true believers leaving the church. My local station today, a railway station, I now see Muslims putting their prayer mats up and praying in the foyer of the local railway stations. 2 Baptist churches have closed and been taken over as Islamic community centres. The church, well, we have to remember what Martin Niemöller said. They came for, and I didn't object because I wasn't, and they're coming for the Christians. We're really standing with you. Is that? Thank you for this. Wishing you all a happy holiday season, something I don't normally like to say, but bless you. See you all in the new year. Take care. God bless.
Thank you.
Thank
Lynn.
you. Thank you,
Bye-bye,
Lynn.
Lynn.
Thank you so much. And we're watching the time. This is such a very good discussion, Sondra. So we're going over a little bit. Could I go back to Barry and ask Barry if he would like to ask his question? Barry, would you like to ask the question that you have? I think you have to unmute.
Yeah,
Yep.
sorry. It sort of wandered on a bit from where I was going. So I think we have to understand when we talk about pastors walking a fine line, it means they're sitting on the fence. And not all churches are like this, but the majority are, unfortunately. And there's a temptation for us to just take the line that the church did in the 1930s, that we don't want to get political, we don't want to offend anybody. It's just a regional conflict anyway, and they don't have any idea that this is an existential conflict. What we saw on October the 7th wasn't anything else but pure, unadulterated evil. And this is a conflict not between Israel and Hamas, but between evil and good, light and darkness. And you must take sides when it comes to that.
Amen.
Yes. Thank you so much, Barry. And a final question from Diane. Nice to meet you, Diane.
Hello, Pam. We've seen each other on the screen. Yes. I'd just like to make a couple of comments. I don't know whether you can see my little badge, but I wear the two flags. I don't wear it every day. Some people look at it and look away. Other people come up and say, that's fantastic. Where did you get it? I want one. Well, I got it in Israel. So, Sondra, you could do a great business shipping some of them out because they are just so popular. And it's just one way you can say things wordlessly without having to, go into a whole lot of words. People just identify you straight away. So I would thoroughly recommend that. I've also got a Jewish mule call badge around my neck. So I wear that too. It's got the Star of David on it. I have been involved with ICEJ for many years, and I would like to point that out to you. The icej.org.au site has a lot of wonderful information, and I would encourage you all to look at the Australian site because that's where we are, and they've revamped that over the last 18 months, 2 years. And a lot of the Israeli stuff, what is in the Jerusalem site, is on our site now too. But there's tremendous amount of information there, and go and have a look and sort of prime yourselves up too, because you don't want to be stumped for an answer. And if you can have the information at your fingertips or point somebody to, well, go and look at this site and look at that and look at that link, that'll point you out to it. And I'd just like to say something about us here in Newcastle, in New South Wales. We have a Hebrew Jewish group every month, and just to learn about the Hebrew roots of our Christian faith. And we have a very close relationship with the Hebrew congregation. We helped them. They had the fourth Hanukkah celebration in Civic Park in Newcastle on Sunday last week. And we had about 250 people, complete with all the salads and the latkes and the sufganiots. And people were just absolutely gobsmacked. Great big Hanukkah. And Rabbi was there. He's also Chabad. And it's just fabulous because I think that there were probably the last, as I said, this is the fourth one, but the last 3 years, it was definitely more Christians than Jews. The Jewish people here are very, very quiet and they don't come out. But I think there was such a groundswell this time because of what had happened on the 7th of October. And if we can keep that going, I've given out to my little group the phone number of the rabbi. And people send SMSs just to say we're standing with you and just to encourage him. He passes that on to his congregation. And just little things like that. We don't have to do a big stand or anything like that. And in closing, I'd just like to say I didn't learn anything about Israel through my church life. And I gave my heart to the church, to the Lord when I was 11. And I'm 66 years past that now. And it was just one of those things that was never, ever taught from the church. But in the 80s, I was going to a church group in Sydney, and Bible Study Fellowship had a course for 12 months called Israel and the Minor Prophets, and all the pennies just dropped into place. And I became very involved with ICEJ as a result of that. So there are avenues out there. Don't think that you're on an island and you're all by yourself. I mean, we're a group here anyway. And if you just go trawling, I've given you a couple of sites and a couple of ideas. And if you talk to other people who are like-minded and just get together and just pray, praise, however the Lord leads you. But we're standing with you for sure, Sondra, as you know, and we just want all our Jewish brothers and sisters to be aware of that. They are not alone. And I think it's not the governments of the world, it's the people of the countries of the world. I know in Newcastle there's quite a lot of people who are call themselves Christian Zionists. So we need to stand up, be more noticeable, but there are little things we can do too. So I encourage you all in that. Bless you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Diane. Sondra, we're getting around to time. Can we let Gina be the final person?
Fine with me.
All right, perfect, Gina.
Right, just really quick. Great idea, the badges. Our group, we go out with it on the street with a stall. One of our group has bought the cheap badges and people want to take them. Stand up for Israel, stand against terrorism, Jewish badges. I love Israel, and Jewish flags, the small ones. It's great. And I wear them on my coat. I don't care if they're cheap looking, but they give the message. And yes, we're standing. And there are people, okay, we've got the pro-Palestinian rabble meeting up the high street, but we're getting more people come to the store to say we support Israel. And more noticeably, ex-army people, ex-army men coming to say, we understand Israel has to do it. We stand with Israel. So, yeah.
That's great.
And I hope there will be people coming on this trip at the end of January into February. The volunteering trip.
The volunteer trip.
Yes. Please come, anyone who's listening. There's only 3 of us. Please come and join.
It's going to be an amazing trip.
Gina, are you talking about the invitation Kim has sent out?
Yes.
To come to Israel?
Yes. It's a volunteer trip.
Yes. Is everybody seen that? It would be advertised on the website. Yes.
But it's gone out in the email.
Yes, it's gone out in the email.
But there are only 3. Please register. Please come.
Yes. Very good. Sondra, we've had a wonderful discussion. And is there any final statement that you would like to make?
Well, first of all, I'm very impressed by, I'm not surprised, but I'm very impressed at how steadfast you all have. And we've heard from so many of you and the little things and the big things that you're all doing to get more support for Israel. So I really appreciate it. And I know that it's not easy because every one of you in many ways is alone in your neighborhood, sometimes even alone in your own church. Some of you are not even in church anymore because you're not finding, the kind of theology or support for Israel that you've been looking for. And I just want to thank you because I know it's not easy to stand the way you do. And I want to just encourage you, every single one of us can do something. We don't have to become the pastor of a new church, or we don't have to, become the Prime Minister of Australia. But every single person can do. We heard some ideas here, handing out badges, handing out brochures, engaging in conversation, talking to your pastor, finding those individuals in the church that are open to hearing what you have to say. And I just want to encourage you to all do as much as you can, support our work, help us get good meetings for Shmuel, and just in general, raise your voices for Israel. Thank you.
Okay. Well, thank you so much, everybody, for being here tonight. I'll close in prayer and then we can say good night and almost farewell to 2024. So Lord, we just thank you for this conversation. Thank you, Lord, that you're raising your spirit in our hearts to be bold and to be forthright about Israel. Lord, we ask you that you are shaking the world. Lord, I ask you that you shake us with courage to let out the knowledge that we have of Israel, the love that we have for Israel. And Lord, let us be bold to pour that love for Israel out on our Christian friends and our fellowship and our pastors. Lord, stir up the hearts of Christians to come to the truth of what's happening. These are your plans, and Israel is here for your purpose. You selected Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and you have them here at the very end. Lord, I just ask you to wake us up and let us be bold, protect Israel, protect the government, the soldiers, the civilians, the ones who are in the hotels. Lord, comfort them and continue to give them hope. Lord, when I was at the Western Wall, I loved the Shekinah glory. I ask you, Lord, to put the Shekinah glory over all of Israel. I praise you, Lord, and I thank you that we will be victorious in you throughout 2024. Praise you, Lord. Amen.
Happy holiday, everybody. Thank you again.
God bless you, Sondra, from Bendigo.
Thank you. Good to see you all.